Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Brian E. Roach and Zach Metkler.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast, brought to you in part by our sponsor, MyBookie. And this edition will be Joe Kuzma free. Why? Because Mr. Kuzma, my normal compatriot, and my name is Brian E. Roach, by the way, in case you don't remember my smooth and silky tones, Joe is tired. He's been busy. He's been running around like a maniac, and he needed a break. So in order to give him a little time off, a little rest and relaxation, as we move forward with this show, I'm going to be joined by one of our favorite folks, a frequent contributor and guest on the show, Zach Metkler. Zach, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Brian. Looking forward to another great show here.
Absolutely. So, as we look ahead, there's all kinds of stuff to talk about with the Steelers this week. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to avoid all of the drama. Because we could talk about Antonio Brown, we could talk about Le'Veon Bell, we could talk about Ben Roethlisberger in things that are not football-related ways, but I don't want to. Let's stick to football. Wasn't that a motto at some point in time back in the day? Stick to football. Anyway, that's what we're going to do. Because we got plenty to talk about on the football side, as the Steelers have a Monday night matchup coming up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And their extraordinarily magically hot, whatever his name is from the Ultimate Fighting or whatever he is. What's that guy's name?
Oh, Conor McGregor?
Yeah, that guy, Conor McGregor. Their quarterback, Conor McGregor, or Conor McGregor wannabe, or Conor McGregor lookalike, Ryan Fitzpatrick. I will say I give him mad props for that look. It was pretty funny, I thought. So,
it was a bold look to pull off, but if he didn't pull it off, I don't think anyone could. I think that was a pretty good look for him there.
It ended up, he pulled it off. I agree. So that's what we're going to focus on. Let's start off at the top. The Bucs are 2-0. They've looked more than good. Quite frankly, they've looked better than I thought they were going to look to start the season, especially without the guy who was their assumed starting quarterback, and I say assumed because who knows at this point. And the Steelers, on the other hand, 0-1-1 with what we would only be able to call a severely disappointing performance last time out, at least on one side of the ball, and at times on all sides. So, should we have any optimism looking towards this game? Or, should we just assume that since Ryan Fitzpatrick has thrown for over 400 yards in his last two games, that's just going to continue?
I've gone back and forth with this. I think there's plenty of reason for optimism, but at the same time, I wouldn't fault anybody for having some level of skepticism with the entire thing. Like you said, I don't think anybody really imagined the Buccaneers, let alone a Ryan Fitzpatrick, Ryan Fitzmagic team, Buccaneers led by that type of explosion on offense. I don't think anybody saw that coming. He's right now has all the chemistry in the world with all the guys he has on offense, Chris Godwin, Sean Jackson, O.J. Howard. They're finding ways to get the ball down the field. Like they've had a cupcake schedule. They've put the yards up there, and I think with the performance we saw from the Steelers last week, facing a similar type of air attack with the Chiefs, I think there is room for concern. That being said, and I will always be in this mindset with the Steelers, they're never an early season team.
Oh, God, yeah.
And, you see this opportunity for the Steelers to kind of come back here. They've had two kind of crummy weeks against the Browns where, the tie unexpectedly occurred after what many people thought would be a quick and easy win to start the season off. Being completely embarrassed, even though it was a close game according to the box score, being completely embarrassed by the Chiefs at home. Week 2, I think this is a good opportunity for the Steelers to try to at least give some comfort to fans everywhere to, see that this is an opportunity for them to kind of come back, try to show that they can stop a somewhat competent quarterback who's playing like one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL right now, which is, again, another sentence I never thought I'd say about Ryan Fitzpatrick. try to slow down that attack on the road in unfriendly confines down in Tampa in what's supposed to be very hot weather from what I've heard so far from early weather reports. So I think it's a good chance for them to do it. I think there is some level of optimism, but, I'm not going to blame anybody for being worried because they have every reason to be worried based on what we've seen so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers lead the overall series 8-2, I think. And to be honest, I don't really remember the last time they lost, and I'd have to look it up, and I just don't want to. But they've had some adventurous games when they've gone down there. They have gone down there. I think the last time I remember them going down there was without Ben when he was, I think, suspended and Charlie Batch played. And look, it's a team. You said that they've had a cupcake schedule, but didn't they open with the Saints?
They did, which is always going to be a tough, division matchup there. So I said it hasn't been a cupcake schedule for them.
Oh, hasn't. I'm sorry. I completely misheard you, which is good. I feel better now because I was going to go, Zach can't possibly be meaning that. But then on the flip side of that, the Saints barely beat the Browns at home. I know we tied the Browns, but we tied them in Cleveland at least. So they very easily could have lost that game if the Browns had a kicker who could kick a field goal or an extra point. But I mean, this is off topic, but are the Saints not nearly as good as we thought they were?
They had the same issue last year too. I remember that first Week 1 matchup against the Vikings last year, where everyone came out there. The Saints defense looked lost. Drew Brees couldn't get a whole lot of stuff going on offense. And then Week 2, I forget who they played in the second week. It was Detroit or something along those lines, and they struggled again. And then Week 3, Week 4, they had this offensive explosion. They discovered what type of talent Alvin Kamara was. They had that nice 1-2 punch with him and Mark Ingram. Michael Thomas kind of came into his own as Drew Brees' seemingly favorite target from his wide receiver group. So, I think this could just be another slow start by a Saints team that seems to, just like the Steelers, kind of traditionally start slow and pick it up as they start getting momentum down the road. But they certainly did look the part that they normally do Week 1 against the Buccaneers. So this could be another year where we start saying the teams like that are led by these aging quarterbacks just don't have it anymore. I'd like to think the Saints on paper are a much better team than what we've seen so far. Which again should lead well to the Buccaneers having a quality victory against another division opponent. But it very well could be. They could be, starting to slow down a little bit. Drew Brees is not getting any younger, and defense hasn't looked anything to write home about. So,
we'll have to see as the season progresses. But it kind of leads into one of the first points I want to talk about because, Steelers Nation is in, if not full-fledged panic mode, just the edge of it. Because of the slow start here. And, I've said this for several years, and I want to see what your thoughts are on this. The fact that the Steelers have traditionally been slow starters and underperformed in their first 3 or 4 games of a season, and have often had, major letdowns in those games where we're just questioning them because they lose to or don't beat handily enough teams that are lesser than we expect. The Bears last year, the travesty to the Eagles, I think the year before that. And in a large part, my feeling about this is this all stems from the fact that, in the modern era, the starters simply don't play in the preseason. They get practice reps, but practice reps aren't game reps. You and I both know that. And they just aren't ready. And it seemed even more so to me this year, especially since Antonio Brown missed a lot of even practice time with Roethlisberger. Those two guys seem particularly out of sync to me in the first 2 games. Do you think this portrays, especially, because we're looking at the Saints, and that's another, again, an aging quarterback I don't pay attention, so I don't know how much playing time Brees got in the preseason, but my guess would be not a lot. Do you think that these rough starts and the teams that seem to come out like gangbusters, it feels to me like they got a lot of playing time, that they were more prepared. Do you think that has anything to do with this?
Yeah, I think it does to an extent. I know I've had the argument with people on Twitter before about, the merits of playing your starters or benching them. And I think there's definitely an argument to be made for both, putting your starting quarterback and receivers and skilled players out there week 1 through 4 of the preseason, letting them get that cohesion. There's the risk you take of having guys get injured and whatnot, but at the same time, there's also the potential to help build that chemistry. And I think, you see teams like the Chiefs. Pat Mahomes is getting those reps all preseason. He's getting those reps throughout practice and training camp, and he was expected to be the guy to replace Alex Smith, and that's why they drafted him. They traded up to draft him. And he gets those reps, and he has the opportunity to build that chemistry in live game action. So he comes out, and we saw the same thing with the Chiefs last year, and they came out and really wall up the Patriots in week 1. Now, look how that ended. The Patriots ended up in the Super Bowl. The Chiefs didn't, because they just hadn't built that cohesion. And I think that's the same thing, kind of like you said, you see with teams like the Steelers and whatnot, because it's typically that first quarter or so of the season, you see them kind of get out the gates really slowly, and they drop some games typically in that window they shouldn't. Everyone starts freaking out, but then week 6, week 7, week 8, you really start seeing them hit their stride. Ben's connecting with AB and Le'Veon and whomever, finding their rhythm down the field. Defense seems to start kind of coming together a little bit more than what we have seen originally. So personally, I think that's a big part of it. And I think if you do have some means of starting your players in the preseason more, and at least for a couple series, I'm not saying playing entire game. Like I know Tom Brady played a couple games up there during the preseason Foxborough where he would play either the first half or he played the entire game. I don't think that's necessary, but more than just the drive or two that Ben typically gets, give them a half, give them a quarter, at least to build some level of cohesion. I think that's kind of a lot of what you see here at the beginning of each of these years is they just aren't in a rhythm yet because, like you said, practice is practice, but being in that live game setting can make the difference when it comes to really seeing what the defense is going to throw to you, building that cohesion in a real game atmosphere with your weapons. And I think that's really what the Steelers have been lacking. But at the same time, I don't fault Mike Tomlin by any means for wanting to protect his starters because we've seen injuries completely derail in the Steelers season in the past. I'd rather have a slow start with full health than have, AB get hurt in the second preseason game, the third preseason game, or Ben go down or something along those lines. So I see the merit to both. But I think that's a very valid reason as to why we could start seeing these slow starts, not even just from the Steelers, from other teams. I saw a stat week 1, like there was along the lines of 63 interceptions in week 1, which was the most, and I forget how long in a week 1 game. I think that's indicative of that theory, that these teams don't have the opportunity to play their starters enough, and they're not in rhythm, which, we saw Ben throw three picks week 1. That's to be a big part of it. You never know.
Yeah. For me, we're not right there yet because this game, the third game of every year, and Joe and I had been talking about this earlier when the schedule came out, and both of us have this game circled in our heads as a potential problem. And it's not just that they're going on the road to Florida where it will be hot, where if history, repeats itself, they will make the Steelers wear black, to take essentially advantage of as much as they can, although it's a night game, so it shouldn't be that sunny, so maybe not. But it's still going to be a hot game, and it's early in the season. And for whatever reason, the past few years, Game 3, specifically out of the group, seems to be a big stumbling block for this team. The Eagles game was Game 3. The Bears game was Game 3. Game 3s seem to be nasty, and this feels like it's a recipe for disaster approaching us because you've got a team that's ultra hot in the Buccaneers, an offense that is ridiculously hot in their offense, a defense that's playing maybe just well, but overall they're 2-0. We haven't won a game yet, and now we're going down there in Game 3. I don't know whether that, in your mind, does that get into a team's head? Does that get into the players' heads at all? The fact that, crud, this is another Game 3, another one on the road. We've stunk up the joint in the last few seasons in Game 3. We got to do better this year.
I think they could. I think back to the last 2 seasons, though, when they went into those Game 3s. I think this year they're going into it with a lot different of a mindset. Just due to looking at the previous weeks. I know like in 2016, they came off of 2 decent wins. That they had that week 1 shellacking of the Redskins, and they came back and had a really solid, hard-fought game against the Bengals. I think they were running into that third week kind of thinking that they're on the road versus a rookie quarterback. They might have let their guards down a little bit. And the same thing with last year. There was that kind of questionable letdown game. They still won against Cleveland week 1. Then it came out and really dominated the Vikings on all facets. And, again, went on the road against a rookie quarterback, or I think it was Mike Glennon at that point, so Trubisky wasn't in. But kind of went into the road and had the opportunity to sit there and think that this is a lesser team. We should beat them. I think this year, looking at the fact that you had the tie against the Browns in a game that was just disgustingly bad to watch on all ends. You had the game last week against the Chiefs where they get pretty much embarrassed in front of their home crowd. I think they go into this week with a little different mindset than they have the last 2 years. And I think there's definitely that kind of thing in the back of your mind, knowing you've had this success or lack thereof against these teams. But I think also looking at the Bucs are a better team than the Eagles were in 2016 and the Bears were last year in 2017. So I'm hoping that there is some level of understanding this is a game. Doesn't matter if it's on the road. Doesn't matter that it's in a hostile environment down in Tampa. I'm hoping that they can put that out of their mind and realize that this is a real opportunity for them to kind of prove themselves in a really good against a very good team that's playing very well at this point in the season. Good opportunity.
Yeah. Now, one thing I think, I tend to follow history a little bit. Like when I do my season in quarter articles, I always try and go back to what are the trends, what's the history, because despite the fact that things blip and there's up and down, history does tend to show you a pattern in how teams can be expected to perform. And so the upside of this for the Steelers, the downside is what we were just talking about. Game 3 seemed to be a problem. But the upside is that, if I'm not mistaken, Ryan Fitzpatrick has never beaten the Steelers.
My knowledge, I don't believe he has either. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think he might be 0-5 or 0-6 or something against the Steelers in, all of the teams he's played for, which is, I think by last count, every one of them. I don't know. He's played for 14 years or something like that. It feels like he's been around forever and been on essentially every team that he could possibly be on. I know that's not really true, but he's played for a lot of teams. But I think the Steelers played him when he was with the Bills, with the Bengals. I don't remember if they played him. Yeah, the Jets, the Texans. I think that's it. So I don't think he's ever beaten them. Now, so from that standpoint, that bodes well. Of course, I don't know that on any of those other teams did Ryan Fitzpatrick ever have the group of weapons he has with the Buccaneers. That is the big difference to me with Fitzpatrick and this team versus Fitzpatrick and, let's say, the Jets or obviously the Bills or the Bengals. I mean, he would have had A.J. Green. I think he would have had Brandon Marshall maybe with the Jets. But you're talking about Mike Evans, O.J. Howard, Deshaun Jackson. I mean, he's got quite a group of weapons, not unlike what they faced with Kansas City, which is, I think, why people are maybe looking at this game and feeling a bit stressed. So do you think that's comparable in that sense, that the weapons they're going to face kind of are similar?
I think it's fair. I mean, obviously Deshaun Jackson's been, one of the premier deep threats in the league for the last, what feels like forever. He's getting towards that point in his career where he's not, but this year he's looked good. He's had some nice vertical movement down the field, similar to what you could see from a guy like Tyreek Hill or Sammy Watkins. You have a big physical receiver like Mike Evans, which again is like or him and O.J. Howard are kind of like a Travis Kelce light. They have pieces around that offense that Ryan Fitzpatrick hasn't had with his stints with the Jets and since, around the NFL, because, he's pretty much the definition of the ultimate journeyman.
Yeah.
I think this is definitely the best offense, at least as of recently, he has been around, that should make some, fans have that mindset that this could be another Chiefs type of game, because certainly the numbers mean that. What the depth chart looks like means that. But at the same time, every season is a new season. I don't see any reason why this Ryan Fitzpatrick is different than previous Ryan Fitzpatricks, other than the fact that he has the weapons around him.
Yeah, in every other game that he's played against the Steelers, he has not managed to score more than 23 points, and that was with the Texans. 13 points in a Jets loss, 16 points in a Bills loss, although that was a very close game, 19-16, and a couple fairly large losses when he was with the people in Cincinnati, who I just don't feel like saying their name anymore. It's from that side of the ball. Look, this is, I think, a dangerous matchup for them. On the plus side, maybe we get Joe Haden back. And, I don't know what you saw last week, but what I thought I saw last week was what we saw against Jacksonville, what we saw early on last year, a lot of miscommunication, a lot of poor handling of transitions in the secondary. And I think Joe brought this up in a tweet that he tweeted out either today or yesterday. There's a lot of youth on this team all of a sudden. The defensive side of this ball, of this team, is very young. When you've got Terrell Edmonds and Mike Hilton and Sean Davis and Artie Burns out there in the secondary, as a group, that's a young group. And, they're not slow. I mean, this is a fast group of guys in the secondary. They have speed, but against that Kansas City team, they looked slow. They looked like their feet were stuck in the mud. And I think that the reason that they played slow and looked slow is because they simply were having issues understanding what they're doing and communicating. I mean, do you think, because I thought Morgan Burnett was going to help that. It didn't appear to be that way last week. But I think if they have Joe Haden back, and I think he was a full participant yesterday, maybe limited today, I'm not sure. I haven't seen the injury report from today yet. That should, at least in my mind, maybe help them get to be a little tighter in the secondary.
Yeah, I forget when it was during training camp. I remember a quote from Artie Burns. I remember exactly, but it was along the lines of the fact that Joe Haden brings this veteran presence and leadership and voice to that defensive back room, that cornerback room that they don't have without him. And even though he's still there on the sidelines, having him on the field definitely helps bridge that communication gap, especially when you have young guys like Sean Davis and Terrell Edmonds kind of resorting over the back end. So I think having Joe Haden back on the field will certainly help them in that regard. You get him back there, even just for the sake of playing. Not that Cam Sutton was terrible, but having Artie Burns and Haden on the field compared to Burns and Haden and Sutton, I think gives you the best feel for it. Because at the same time, then you put Sutton on one side, Burns on the other. Sutton's a year younger than Burns is, so he's only getting younger on that end. And you still have guys like Sean Davis and Edmonds in the back. There is no cohesion. There is no real leadership. And contrary to what a lot of fans think, these guys have every player has some level of a football IQ, but not every player is going to be, the Troy Polamalu's, Red Reeds of the world, where they're just gushing with football intelligence, especially at this point in their young careers, especially when they came out as raw as they did. So having a guy like Joe back there kind of is the glue to hold that secondary together, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. So now I know that it was a hamstring injury, but if you had to bet, what is your bet? You think he plays this week or not?
I personally think he does, just due to the fact of the circumstances, because you don't want to go 0-2-1 heading into week 4 against Baltimore. That's just not a position you want to, especially with as good as Baltimore does. But saving him up for Baltimore would be a good thing because you need all hands on deck there. So I'd hate to see him tweak a hamstring again whenever he's on a non-conference game against an NFC opponent on the road on Monday Night Football. But that extra day could give him the potential to come back there, So I think there is merit to have him out there because you don't want to fall into that hole where you're 3 weeks into the season going into week 4 and you still don't have a win yet.
Yeah. Now, my bet is he plays too. And the thing, you're going to watch this is going to be an awesome transition. Everybody just be ready. Be ready for this transition. The thing about betting is, sometimes it's just as important who you bet with as who you're betting on or what you're betting on. So that brings us to our sponsor, MyBookie, which is a website that allows you to bet on a lot of different things. You certainly can bet on the Steelers. You can probably bet on the point spread. You might even be able to bet on whether Joe Haden plays or not. And you can find them at mybookie.ag on the web. The nice thing about it is it's a good service, and they've got a great reputation. You make your bets, you win, they pay you. It's simple. It's straightforward. They've got in-game live betting. They've got over and unders. They've got fantasy point scored betting. all kinds of stuff that allow you to indulge your betting whims, I guess. The thing is, if you go to mybookie.ag and you sign up new and you use the promo code SteelCity, they will match your initial deposit 100%. So if you deposit $100, they'll match it $100. And I think it's up to $100. So you could get $200 worth of playing for $100. Just use Steel City as your promo code. And the thing is, they've gotten so busy that they actually are jammed during the early hours of the day. So if you're willing to wait and deposit something after 7 p.m. Eastern time, they're actually going to give you an additional $25 of free play. So again, you go to mybookie.ag, you enter the promo code, sign up, enter the promo code Steel City, and you will be able to get up to double what you deposited, up to $100, and then maybe even $25 more. So if you're a betting person, I don't know if you are, Zach, but if you are, sign up at mybookie.ag, place your bets, win, and get paid. Okay, so with that being said, if Hayden plays, that's good. And one of the other things that goes along with this, and it was not in evidence in Game 2, but it was in evidence in Game 1, what is your assessment, being the offensive line guru that you are, of the Buccaneers' offensive line?
Quite frankly, my soft spot will always be Ali Marpet, just due to the fact that he's got that D3 loving there in the NFL. Living the dream that so many of us small school guys had the opportunity never to have. He's living it out right now as their benchmark left guard that they've kind of had to move around a couple places. Guys about to get paid. I think their offensive line has potential. There's not a whole lot of things on there that scream out there. Donovan Smith's been a nice key for them, and Ryan Jensen hasn't been that terrible. But as a whole, the Steelers' defensive line hasn't been what we've wanted them to be. They've had moments of greatness. Cam Hayward's still Cam Hayward. Stephon Tuitt comes to his consistency. But I think this is also a good opportunity. This is a very vulnerable offensive line compared to the lines that they've seen in the last 2 weeks. To really kind of go out there and take advantage of it. Javon Hargrave has been kind of quiet again so far this season. He definitely can dominate on that interior. Cam Hayward and Stephon Tuitt, when they bump down in their interior techniques, whenever they're doing more of their dime and nickel looks, there's opportunity there to have some penetration, get upfield, and make some plays. Because certainly a running back, Peyton Barber's been their guy behind that line. And when he's had the lanes, because the last 2 weeks, the Buccaneers have been able to create lanes. Even though they're not doing a whole lot of ground running, Peyton Barber's still been a little bit of peace for them. The Steelers have a great opportunity to force the Buccaneers to throw, because I don't think they're going to get much of a running game going, because I don't trust the Bucs line to, get some push up front. And the Steelers can force Fitzpatrick to throw and kind of limit that playbook and get into a shootout potentially, or even hold them and get a lead. I think that's really where you're going to see the offensive line start struggling, because I think the Steelers do have the ability to take advantage of the fact that DeMar Dotson hasn't been anything special, at least on my mind. I'm sure I'll have some Buccaneers people calling me out for that, because I'm sure I missed something with them. But I think that's a great opportunity for TJ Watt to kind of come out there and take advantage and put some pressure on Fitzpatrick. No one's really gotten to Fitzpatrick yet so far this season. This is a good opportunity for the Steelers to keep padding those stats. I don't think this offensive line is good enough at this point to stop what the Steelers have up front in the front seven.
Gotcha. And I agree with you. I think what's going to happen initially is they're going to do what they've been doing. They're going to try and rush just, the normal pass rush that they would do. I don't think they're going to try and do any of these exotic blitzes. And, I was thinking about this, especially as it relates to the last game. This team, and this defense especially, this team is designed to play ahead, play from ahead, right? It's not that they can't catch up, but their defense is not designed to play catch up. They are designed to get a couple stops, let the offense score points, and get ahead so that they can get teams into that locked-in mode where they have to pass. Because when they have to pass and the Steelers are going to be able to just pin their ears back and rush the passer, I think that's one of the strengths of this team. But when they have to do double duty and they still have to protect against the run and they can't just focus on getting to the quarterback, it slows them down a little bit. And especially if they're in a situation like they were with Kansas City, where they fall behind 21 points. Now it's a different – they have to play a different way. I mean, look, Kansas City didn't really try and run the ball much, to be honest, but and my theory sort of breaks down because everybody was wide open. But I was trying to think about this, and that's the way I view this defense. Do you think that that's accurate or not?
You know, I was really confident during training camp in the preseason that the Steelers' defense would be able to improve against the run, and so far I haven't really seen that. And I think, like you said, trying to defend both because you're in a back and forth shootout, you know, that kind of spreads the Steelers' defense thin. You know, I saw a tweet earlier about how they're trying to simplify the defense, and I think that's a really good thing to do, especially with the youth that the Steelers' defense has. And it'll put them in a situation to better defend both the pass and the run. Because I think the Buccaneers are going to come out, you know, guns blazing in the air. But I think if they have the opportunity to try to establish a run game, they'll take the opportunity to do that, especially if the Steelers' defense comes out as weak as they have against the recent weeks and in the last season. I think keeping it simple, like they're talking about doing. I know a lot of fans were up in arms about that because, you know, they're saying, oh, well, you know, back when Dick LeBeau was defensive coordinator. But when you have a young team like this, it's good to keep it simple until they get that experience, because I'm tired of seeing these guys go out there head spinning. You know, we talked about this in our back room about all these guys getting stuck in the mud, blowing their coverages, not communicating. That comes with just the wherewithal of knowing what you're doing. And I think no matter what level you're at, whether it's Pee Wee, high school, college, or the NFL, I'd rather have a minimized book of plays, doing them extremely well and executing them play in and play out, and have this expansive thing where you have these guys that have no idea what they're doing. They're blowing coverages. They're not communicating. They're caught out position. You know, I like the idea of simplifying it down and having these guys being able to defend either the run or the pass and forcing the situation. You want to force the Buccaneers' hand. You don't want to let them be able to do and have an open playbook and run with it. You know, force them to minimize them to just passing, and force them to have to be on the run. You know, that's where the Steelers are going to have their most success, especially just with the youth they have on this defense in key possessions.
Yeah, and people forget rookies and young guys didn't start on Dick LeBeau's defense. For that very reason, there was too much going on, and it was too much for them to comprehend. And there is a lot of truth to when you're thinking, you're playing slower. You need to be able to just play and let the game come to you. If you've got to overthink or overprocess everything, your reactions are simply going to be slower, and there's just no getting around that. So I agree with you. I think I like the idea of simplifying this playbook down and focusing on execution, focusing on getting a limited set of defensive schemes and plays down pat, playing to the strengths of the guys that they have. Because I think if they can generate a pass rush, which I think is going to be key, that will help the secondary. If they can get to Fitzpatrick, and like you said, nobody really has so far this year, but if they can get to Fitzpatrick, get him on the ground a couple times, that's what rattles him. He doesn't want to get hit. You know, not to poo-poo Ivy League guys, but you know, Harvard guys don't want to get hit. So, you know, I think he can be rattled, and the Steelers have the horses to do it. I expect TJ to have a good game. I expect Cam Hayward to have a nice game. I would like Stephon Tuitt, as you said, to be more consistent. You know, the thing is, he scares you in some ways because he will be so dominant on a couple plays, and then he just vanishes. And you go, what happened? And you know, but when he is at his disruptive best, it's scary for another offense because he just can't be stopped, and he causes havoc. So we need to see some consistency there. And I want to talk about Bud. You know, everybody's current whipping boy. And you know, Joe and I, neither one of us is nearly as down on Bud as some of the other folks out there are, nor as even some of the other folks in the SEU halls are. Yes, Bud overruns plays sometimes. Bud gets out of position and runs past the quarterback or is easily led past the quarterback, but it's not every play. And he does seem to me to be getting better and more consistent pressures from the left side than he did from the right side.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's accurate, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that whenever he was coming from that strength, strong side, typically the right side of the line, the quarterback sees him, and when he over pursues the way that he does, quarterbacks have no problem just stepping up in the pocket and evading it. And he doesn't have the ability, or at least he didn't have the ability in previous seasons, to kind of slow down, disengage, anchor, turn upfield, and turn in and try to tackle the quarterback. I think he has gained that ability more so from the fact that he has the ability to come from the blind side, not necessarily seeing the quarterback, feel his presence coming down, kind of get the ability to turn in quicker and beat that corner and dip around the edge. He has the potential to be at least above average edge rusher. And I know a lot of people want him to be, the next Von Miller. I don't think he was ever going to be the next Von Miller. He had the intangibles and he had the test numbers and the size and the speed that you want from a guy rushing off the edge. But to put him out the gate, I think he'd be Von Miller. I don't think he ever gets to that point. I think his peak is going to be just a very average to semi-above average starter in this league, which honestly, if he can get that consistency like he's starting to get a little bit more of now at this point, that's really what they need, because I think moving forward, T.J. Watt is going to be their premier pass rusher. And most teams in the league, unless you're the Chargers or the Broncos up and coming, no one really has two premier elite pass rushers. So the Steelers just need some level of consistency from Bud, and I think they're starting to see that from him switching over to the right side, because I think he has the ability to be athletic, beat those guys around the backside, and really kind of use his technique and work his technique. I still believe, and I've been a Bud Dupree truther since day one, so I'm not getting off the bandwagon now. I think his best days of football are still ahead of him. I think there's too many roadblocks that have gotten in the way of his development, and there comes the question of when do you give up on a guy. I don't think the Steelers are in a position where they want to give up on him, nor do I think they should give up on him. So I think if he could just, like you said, get consistent pressure from that backside, I think realistically he can be a consistent contributor and start putting some sacks together and get those high level of pressures he has so far this season down.
Yeah. So we've talked, and it makes sense because the biggest concern is the defense. We've talked heavily about the defense. Let's flip over the side and talk about the matchups with the Buccaneers offense, or Buccaneers defense, and the Steelers offense. In the last game, in many ways, the offense played fine. Look, if the offense can put up 37 points for you, or 35 if you take away the safety that the defense got, 35 points, you should win more games than not. But there were still issues with the offense. 3 empty possessions to open the game are problematic, and especially 3 empty possessions that really were nothing more than, almost all 3 and outs. I think one of them might have been 1 or 2 extra plays, but they were very quick in and outs of the game. And they can't continue to do that. And I think that they will, as they start to find their rhythm, that will stop. I maintain the offense is still not something that worries me, even without Le'Veon Bell, even with AB and Ben not necessarily being completely in sync. And people need to understand, part of that, I think, is that AB is getting a huge emphasis in coverage. Ben, one of the interceptions where he tried to force the ball to AB in the first game was because he was triple covered. He tried to make that exact same throw in the second game, and it almost was picked off, but not. AB is not seeing single coverage, I don't think, at all during these games at this point. That may change because JuJu is having really good games. If James Washington starts to appear, which we would think he is getting the nod because he is already advanced past Justin Hunter, that could change. And if that changes, AB's numbers and AB's catches will come to him, and Ben and AB will be fine. But, they need to find a way. I think, the run game, I was starting to go down this path of the run game essentially disappeared or never got on track in the first game. And maybe had James Conner been a focal point early on in those first 3 drives instead of what they did end up doing, maybe, it slows the tempo down and it changes things around. Who knows? It's hard to predict any change in that game considering how the defense played, but I can see that there is a need, and you would think with a guy who essentially had 190-plus yards of offense in the first game against Cleveland, which is probably still a better defense than either the Chiefs or the Buccaneers, getting him on track this game feels like a necessity to me.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think in any facet of football, having some run game is a good thing. It helps you, like you said, control the tempo. There's nothing more demoralizing than having a running back just gashing you after play after play after play, especially one that's as bruising and downhill running as James Conner. So I think establishing that early. I think what happened, at least from my opinion, from the Chiefs game last week, I think he had a couple of those negative yards, negative runs, and the Steelers started panicking a little bit because the Chiefs came out, boom, score, came out, boom, score, and you have those 2-3 and outs to start the game for the Steelers. James Conner's picking up negative yardage. The line's not getting any push from him. You start panicking a little bit, and you're like, well, we got to start airing the ball because now we're in second and long, we're in third and long. I think at some point, if the defense does their part and slows down the opposing team's offense, you can rely on giving James Conner the ball a little bit, because at some point the offensive line's good enough and James Conner's good enough that something will give and something will break, and that gives you that momentum for the opposing defense to start respecting what you're throwing at them, because the Chiefs didn't think James was going to run because there's no reason for him to run.
Yeah.
They're up 21-0. They're not going to give James Conner the ball and start running and pounding the rock. You have no choice but to throw it out. So I think getting him on the ground, getting him started early, especially against a defense like the Buccaneers that has the ability to be ran against, I think that's a good chance for them to kind of start controlling the game then, instead of letting the Buccaneers get first blood first. I think that's what happened to the Chiefs. They turn the ball over, they get the ball, return it all the way down to the 10 or 12 yard line, somewhere around there, and they score 2 plays later. So you can't let that happen. So realistically, getting the ball run game started, I'm all for it. Control the clock, control your own destiny at that point.
Absolutely. I just feel like that needs to be a point of emphasis in this game, and it should be. Now, one of the questions will be David DeCastro. I don't know that he's going to play this game either, and I certainly am an advocate of not rushing him back, because I've had a hand injury. I broke my hand, many years back, and I know how that can linger, and you certainly don't want to cause it to be something that goes on through the entire season. They need him for the long run. But I haven't seen the practice reports. I don't know if he practiced fully or if he was held out. And I could look it up, but that will take effort. And so B.J. Finney filled in last week, and while B.J. Finney's done a really good job when he's filled in for Ramon Foster, that's still a considerable drop-off from David DeCastro. Do you think that the line will have any difficulty getting some momentum in the running game?
I think B.J. Finney's proved himself enough. I think the biggest thing that comes about is the fact that DeCastro, in my opinion at this point, is the guy that holds that line together. So I think whenever Ramon Foster went in and B.J. Finney replaced him, you still had Pouncey, you still had DeCastro on the other side making up that interior. Nothing against Foster, because Foster, as a leader on and off the field for the Steelers, period. When it comes to just that communication aspect, when it comes to that guy that you want on your line no matter what, I think the drop-off between DeCastro and Finney is more than just the talent level. I think there is just that communication and just the grit that he brings. I mean, how many guys are going to go and fracture their hand and go back to play the rest of the game? I mean, I personally don't think I would be able to do that. So I get all the credit in the world to DeCastro doing that. So I think there is. I don't want to see him come back. I'd rather him stay out another game or two and then come back and be here for the long haul and rush back, re-injure it, and, like you said, have it linger on all year. I'm not worried about Finney. I think he is a starter, capable player in the NFL. He's not an all-pro like DeCastro is, obviously. But I don't fault him for the lack of a run game last week. And if it comes down to it and DeCastro doesn't play, I'm not going to blame him because I don't think he's at fault. He didn't have a bad game in the trenches. It was just the nature of the way the game went. So I don't think it's that big of a deal, but having DeCastro on the field is going to give you the best chance of winning.
Yeah, and I just looked up the injury report, and he did not participate on Thursday. Marcus Gilbert also did not participate with a hamstring, but I don't think that's going to keep him out of the game. I don't think that there's been any reports that he's in danger of not playing. We'll have to see. I mean, if he doesn't practice tomorrow, then you start to worry, because if you lose 2 cogs out of that offensive line now, it's a little different. But I think they can run the ball. Now, the nice thing, if you want to find positives out of what's happened so far this season, JuJu Smith-Schuster, I think, is one of those positives, and the continuing rapport that he's building and trust he's building with Ben. Look, Ben threw for 452 yards last week, and at one point, because they get so far behind, or it's a shootout, those are the types of games where Ben can throw for 500 yards. I mean, he's done it 3 times. And this was, I don't know, his 8th game or something like that. He took the lead over Dan Marino, who he's tied with for a number of games over 450 yards. Ben can get the offense rolling. Yes, they got to avoid these empty possessions. And if they do get into a shootout with the Buccaneers, Ben can duel Ryan Fitzpatrick without any problem. But I'm excited because a lot of people earlier in the year were speculating that maybe JuJu would have a sophomore slump, that maybe he wouldn't be as ready. People, you know how Yinzers are. They whined and complained because he wasn't paying attention, or they thought he was too focused on other things. Clearly, he has progressed again. He's continuing to grow in the offense and become a reliable weapon for the Steelers.
I agree, and I think all the fans that were complaining about him being drafted by the Steelers last year now are regretting ever having that early reaction to it. Because right now he's 240 yards on the season, 5th overall in the NFL. If you told me at this point that he would be the guy leading the Steelers by a pretty sizable margin in receiving yards through 2 weeks, it wasn't going to be AB, and then AB would be 3rd behind Jesse James, no less. I wouldn't believe you. I would definitely take the bets against you. I think he's been one of the bright spots on this offense. I know some people in the media, I'm not going to name any name, but have been relatively difficult on him for his youth and the sprightness he brings to the team. But I think that's something they need. He's been a consistent uplifting factor for the Steelers offense. That rapport he's getting with Ben is not to be taken for granted at all. Especially whenever he's struggling getting that ball to AB, and Connor's still developing as a receiver. Having a guy like JuJu that has the strong hands, he consistently high points the ball. He's proven that he can be a deep threat if need because he has that deceptive quickness to get down the field. I think it's invaluable what he's bringing to this offense right now. And if he was on any other team that didn't have an Antonio Brown, I think he would be the number 1 receiver on that team. I think he's proving that he can be and will be and should be the future star of the offense once this era of aces have left the Steel City.
Yeah, I think this is my take on this game. I think James Conner will show up. I don't know that he has as good a game as he had in Cleveland, but I think he will be enough of a factor to help the Steelers. I think AB gets back on track with Ben. I think AB has a huge game. That's my take on this game. Is I think AB is going to have a huge game. I think he's going to be determined to have a big game, and I just don't think that the Tampa Bay secondary is going to be able to contain Vance McDonald, JuJu Smith-Schuster, James Washington, and Antonio Brown, and then throw Jesse James potentially even into that mix. I just don't see it.
No, I agree. I think there's too many weapons that you might not have realized beforehand if you were, a fan of another team in the league. The Steelers have always been, lauded for their weapons, but I just think the Buccaneers defense has points. They have a young cornerback in Carlton Davis out there. Brent Grimes isn't getting any younger. They have points that they can put up yards. I mean, look at the past couple of weeks. Like the Saints were able to put up some yardage. It wasn't like Drew Brees rolled over and let them, dominate. Drew Brees has had a good game against them with their weapons. That the Saints have a very nice arsenal, just like the Steelers do. Going back to AB, but we've seen this story in the past. Whether it's warranted or not, drama comes up during the week. Fans and media start putting words in AB's mouth about him being upset, wanting to be traded, whatever narrative you want to put in there. Then he comes out the next week. Ben gives him about 25 targets. He comes down with like 16 catches and 180 yards and 2 touchdowns. We've seen that before. I wouldn't be surprised to see it happen again. I think it's only a matter of time until something gives and AB just goes off. And I think this is the week that if you're going to see it, it's going to happen now, just due to the fact that it's only a matter of time. He's still the best receiver in the NFL, regardless of what the stats have indicated. He hasn't had a bad season, but by AB standards, it's been a lesser season you would expect. And I think that will give this week, especially, if James Washington has another full week of being in there with Ben. We saw Ben target James Washington early and often last week against the Chiefs. It wasn't like he didn't want to get him. He just overthrew a couple times, and that's just timing and having trust and chemistry with each other. And I think if they can start connecting on a couple of those passes, you have to start respecting him down the field. JuJu's proven himself at this point. AB will get those coverages where he has a chance to be one-on-one, then takes advantage of it and blows the top off the defense. It's going to happen, in my opinion, and I'll be excited whenever it does.
Yeah, I mean, Breeze threw for 439 yards against them. Look, it was Nick Foles-led Eagles, so I'm not going to, I understand what he did in the playoffs in the Super Bowl, but it's not the same thing. I just feel like they can take advantage of this team if they need to. And so to kind of wrap this up and put a bow on it, while there certainly is reason to be suspect of this game, there's certainly reason to be concerned, and there's every chance that this game could turn into another shootout. I think there's reason to think the Steelers can finally get a W. They can get on the plus side here and essentially truly even out their record at 1-1-1. Boy, that's not a record you see often. And I know that in our weekly pick'em, some people who shall go unnamed did not pick the Steelers.
You just add me, man. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm adding you. I'm outing you. But I did, and I still think they're going to win this game. It may be a ridiculous game. It may be a game that keeps Steelers fans up all night Monday night and put them in a state where they're all calling out of work. It's going to be a black and gold Tuesday because everybody's going to have the black and gold flu from being up until after either complaining about the game or excited about the game or both combined because, this could be 45-40 at the end of the night. And it could be a 30-21 game. You never know. I expect the defense to perform better with Joe Haden there. I expect him to be a calming influence. The fact that they're going to limit the playbook to something that's more comfortable for all these young guys to handle is a benefit. And I just feel like this is the game that the offense is going to get fully back on track. So I expect the Steelers to come out of Tampa with a win, a much-needed win. And put themselves back on the right path heading into Baltimore the following week.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly won't be surprised one way or the other if the Steelers come away with a well-earned win, or if they don't. If they don't, I don't think it's the end of the season either. I think this is a situation where you look at one where that tie could make the difference because a loss would be a lot worse at that point if they're 0-2-1 compared to being 0-3, just from a ranking standpoint.
Yeah.
So I think that if they were to lose to Tampa Bay, yes, they have a tough competition the following week against Baltimore in Pittsburgh. A loss there, I think, would be a lot more concerning than a loss this week. This is a non-conference game to an NFC opponent that I think by the time the season is done will not be in the playoff picture. If the Steelers were to drop it, I wouldn't be surprised, but I wouldn't go screaming, flipping my tables up in the air, calling for Mike Tomlin to be fired and Ben's washed up, blah, blah, blah. I am picking the Buccaneers in this one. This should be a good sign for some people because typically when I pick against the Steelers, they end up proving me wrong. So I'm kind of trying to do you guys a favor here, Brian. That's kind of why that was the secret motive as to why I picked them in our weekly pick-ems for SCU. So you're welcome.
All right. I'll have to ask Tina what her excuse is.
That's my excuse. I'm sticking to it. But, I wouldn't be surprised either way, but I do like the Buccaneers. I think it's going to be a higher scoring game. I don't think it's as high as it was last week, but I think you could see like a 35-30 type game in the favor of the Buccaneers, assuming that Steelers defense doesn't or can't get it together. So,
all right. So that's going to tie things up for us here. Hopefully we have given you a lot to think about for this game. Joe will be back, and we will talk about the game afterwards. In the meantime, though, everybody just relax, to quote, Mr. Rogers. Let's just calm and see what happens. It's early, and, hey, the way that the NFL scores things, they have half a win.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So, everybody, be safe, be good, and remember, be kind, because it's chaos out there. We'll talk to you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.